All right, so there's a couple of things here on this unit. I went through and I made some changes, and then what I'll also talk about here towards the end is the hydraulic manifold. I had a lot of problems on this left side. All three of these going down on the left side have a recessed cutout, and they were using an outer O-ring, and that was just causing a lot of problems. I finally ended up ditching the outer O-ring and then used some Loctite 545, and that solved that problem. But while I'm here, I thought I'd go ahead and go through a couple of other things that I changed on this or noticed on this particular unit. So first of all, it did not come with a hydraulic oil temperature gauge. I had this fitting welded in, put in my temp sensor, and then ran this up, and I'll come around there in just a moment. Another issue I noticed was that on the hoses, this one in particular, the way they had it tightened, and I'll show that in just a moment, this actually was rubbing up against this edge and was sort of just cutting right into it. So to fix that, all you got to do, a little hard to see here, but on this fitting, if you can see that right there, on this fitting right here, all you got to do is loosen this and then turn this out just a little bit, and that'll pull that hose out away then from that outer edge. Other than that, there was a hose here that I rerouted, I guess, while I'm thinking about it. Go through the harbor tour. This particular hose here was coming up here, real easy to reroute. Change this routing to where now I can get in here and I can test to see if I've got any hydraulic oil leakage there. So that was real easy to just reroute and bring back up here. Is the overflow tank for the radiator fluid. So what I did was I took a bracket or some, just some square bracket, and then welded them together, and then used, it's actually a Yamaha Banshee overflow for the radiator fluid, and then that worked out real well. And then I route my overflow down below the engine bay, down here underneath this. I noticed what I did was I added a fan, and I tied in to here. I tied into the hot lead here, and then this is going to be running my fan. This runs about 4.2 amps, but I did not notice in my testing, I did not notice any reduction in the hydraulic oil temperature, which was my objective. So I may or may not keep this, but it certainly, pulls air out of here. And then also put a 10 amp fuse. On that fuse bank, I noticed that I could pull all the fuses and this thing would still run. So that sort of bothered me a little bit. So I took that out, changed and rerouted this. On that dead end, which is this one right here, I use this hot lead to then run my oil temp gauge, my hydraulic oil temp gauge. And then of course, then I ran to ground, and then also put a inline fuse, 10 amp fuse on my fan. The other little leak I had was down here. I went with just a standard, I don't know if that's going to show up or not. I went with a standard on that main line coming out of the hydraulic tank. If you reach under there, sometimes you can feel a little bit of oil, so I changed that out, used a different hose tightener, and that solved that problem. On the tank itself, there's an O-ring. I'll show you the O-rings that it had. It has like a little groove cut out here, and what was happening was the hydraulic oil, it'll slosh around in here a little bit. The oil is actually coming out through the screws. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little bit. It's sort of bugging me. I see hydraulic oil link. It sort of makes me wonder, what's going on there. So I got that corrected, and what I did was I just used a solid 1/16 MBR and made a gasket, complete gasket, to seal around the holes itself, and that took care of that problem as well. Also on these, what I ended up doing was I pulled these off when they were painting. I don't think they, these both on the hydraulic oil and on the diesel, where these fit in onto the tank, I ended up coming back and scraping that paint off, and that gave me a much better fit. And then you could also use this material for that gasket there as well, but that gave me a much better fit and to keep a little bit of seepage. Again, it's not a lot, but it was just a little bit more of an annoyance to come in and over time have it dripping down on the garage floor. Just used, I just added this on here. So this is just my old temp gauge, and then right in there you can see my fan, and then I just added in a 10 amp inline fuse for that. To go over a couple of things that I did to get this sealed up the way I wanted. First of all, on these fittings, this is going to be the top two, and this will be on the bottom one on the hydraulic oil manifold. They had these outer O-rings in that recessed area. Well, these are surface type fittings, and so I trial and error, quite a few trial and error. I finally just removed these O-rings and then bought new O-rings for this top one here. I get these, if you go to get that on the screen there for that top fitting, and then I use this O-ring here for that bottom one, more of the square O-ring. And this is actually a little bit better O-ring. It's got, not sure what they call it, but it's got more surface area to seat. That, along with the Loctite 545, that solved the hydraulic manifold leaking. Now, I don't have any more leaks out of there. These were, if you wanted to stay with those O-rings, these are the actual O-ring size, if that'll show up on the screen here. That's the O-ring that I was using for the top of the hydraulic oil tank. But again, I ended up going with these. This is just a solid sheet. It's 1/16 NBR, and I made a gasket out of this for that hydraulic oil tank. I also used and changed out the Zerk Fitting covers that they had. I decided to go with these. They just work better. And then also, while you're working on hydraulics, this is sort of my first rodeo on hydraulics, you're going to want some caps and plugs, so when you pull those hoses off, you can control or stop any leakage coming out of those hoses. It is a real mess. And so that's the plug, and then up here I use the cap, and I got those from Clearwater. And essentially those are going to be 8L, 14 millimeter by 1.5. Now the other thing I did, you'll notice that on that particular unit, mine does have an oil cooler on it through the radiator, but mine did not have a oil filter. Now it's got a strainer. So what I did was I made this sort of setup here. And what I do then, there's different motors that you can work with, but this in particular was probably an overpowered motor, but what I liked about it was it has a screen. It also has a backflow. So if the backflow pressure, it just cycles back through here. And then from here I go through a 10 micron filter. And you know, after 5 hours or wherever, I don't use it very often, but I'll come and I'll hook these hoses up, and I just have these hoses here. This is going to be my intake hose, and I have a little suction down there at the bottom. This particular motor will really draw suction on it, so I have that little thing there to allow the hydraulic fluid to go underneath, and then I have my return. So I'll hook that up and run it for 5 minutes and clean out that hydraulic tank. The other thing I noticed on the pressure, the manual doesn't come with a lot of information, so you're probably going to want to get one of these. And again, this is going to be an 8L 14 millimeter by 1.5. Mine runs, the hydraulic pressure on this runs at 2600 psi. If you get a hold of the folks from the manufacturer, you're probably going to need to translate that into Pascal something or other. I forgot what the reference is, but they're metric, okay? And these fittings, by the way, are DIN fittings, D-I-N. And so you're going to have to find, they're not just standard JIC fittings that America has. You're going to have to get special fittings, but you got fittings for them. So that's probably it. Overall, again, I really love this excavator. I think it's a great excavator. It does everything that I need it to do. And so I just made a couple of changes. For the price, I'm still way ahead of what it would have been had I gone with one of the name brands. All right, there's a couple of things when I had this apart, I meant to go over, so I'll go over it right now. So first, I did want to say that I've been very happy with this excavator. If I didn't have one, knowing what I know, I would buy it again. Also, the manufacturer's been very helpful when I've had questions. They've been very responsive. So there are a couple of things, like I said, that I went over in the recording when I had it down, and I'm going over now. But these are minor things that I encountered. Maybe it'll be helpful to somebody else. One of the things I noticed that here on the Zerk Fitting that's right there, the way they've got this positioned, you'll notice I took a cable tie and just pulled this hose up just a little bit to keep it from rubbing on there. I'm not sure why they did it this way. I would have put that Zerk Fitting in the front so that there wouldn't be any obstruction there. The other Zerk Fitting that I did is, if you can see, it's right in between, sandwiched in between those two. And again, I used some cable ties to just hold it off to the side, and that's been plenty. I would have put that Zerk Fitting probably more in the front or on the bottom. That way it wouldn't have ever been in the way of those cables. Now, I took my claw off. I don't really use it that often, and if I did, I can just put it on. It's real easy to put on. But when I was talking about the pressure gauge, what's really, really nice is these units do come with a you can control the valve that's going to go out. So in terms of the pressure gauge, what you're going to want to do is you're just going to hook it up to one of these, and then with the engine off, and then go ahead, start it up, and then you can depress the claw, which then will allow pressure to flow through here, either A or B port. And then when you're through, be sure to turn it off and then disengage or move the controls around to relieve the pressure that's in there, and that'll be fine. But these are really nice, quick way to check the pressure. I was talking about these fuses, also meant to talk about in terms of checking the amperage. Now on mine, the easiest thing to do is on this hot lead coming to the starter. I use a clamp on amp meter, and that's the easiest way to check the current draw of amps. This has a permanent magnet alternator. It's hard to see, it's sort of behind, it's right in here. And this one puts out about 14 amps. So it's important as you start adding things on here to check your amperage. But this checking spot right here will give you your total amperage. Easy to get to with the clamp on amp meter and measure your total amperage that's being pulled out, so that you don't exceed, really don't want to come over 70%, 80%, close to there. Check your manufacturer, consult a mechanic, but you don't want to, if it's 14 amp alternator, you don't want to be pulling 14 amps. Last, when I was talking about some of the seepage, like I said, this is my first rodeo with hydraulics, but you'll notice that I've got my hydraulic oil just coming into the sight glass. Remember, the way the manual says it's, to be filled up to right here. Well, what happens is when you start using your boom and you pull this boom back, all the hydraulic fluid in that cylinder, as you extend those out, all that fluid is going to come back into your tank. So if you've already got it filled up here, what's going to happen is it's going to overflow, literally. And depending on how high you got it and where you got your boom when you do your initial fill. But remember, the air breather cap, that hydraulic oil is going to come out somewhere, and it'll come out that air breather cap. So it took me a couple of tries on this to realize what was happening. But if you just fill it up right here at the bottom of the sight glass, you'll be fine. I don't know, maybe the sight glass should be a little bit lower, but anyway, hopefully that helps.